Welcome back for another episode of Marcelina, my Reliance 44 sailboat rebuild project. There's been a lot of work done since my last update, so let's jump right in, starting with a quick recap of the previous episode. So last time I showed the installation of the port lights with new acrylic lenses. Fixed port lights. I used a light tint. Light smoke, I think. We spent some time going over the mast and all the work done, including at the masthead, running new wires and replacing all the rigging, stays, shrouds, and connectors. We saw the mast collar before and after refurbishing, and some of the interior work done in the forward berth. Lastly, I explained how the bulk of the wiring had been complete, and we fired up the new switch panel. In this video, we'll cover some more wiring work, including some makeshift compass lighting, the addition of dorades for more ventilation, installation of the main cabin ceiling panels and lights, interior frames for the recently reinstalled port lights, a custom-made rigging part, replacing a steering quadrant and the steering cables, adding a fuel-water separator, and a couple of odds and ends. Okay, on the wiring front, I've added a jumper terminal for all the wiring coming down the mast. This will allow me to easily disconnect the wires when removing the mast, instead of having to cut all the wires like I did last time. Reassembling the binnacle was a bit of a challenge, and I ended up replacing the throttle and clutch cables. I don't recall whether it was a throttle or the clutch levers that were installed backwards. Maybe it was both. But I got that all sorted out and everything is put back together. There was also no light bulb for the compass, and I couldn't find a replacement for the old Cestral compass. So I found the lowest watt LED bulb I could find, drilled a hole to mount it, and wired it up. I then made a new cover, and presto, a lighted compass. In order to help ensure good ventilation in the main cabin, I bought a couple of dorades, along with dorade boxes to help keep the rain out. The boxes I bought as unfinished teak and finished them myself, and then mounted the dorades. To attach the boxes to the deck, I used some PVC rails, which were first test fit to the inside of the box, and then mounted and sealed to the deck. Then I just sealed the box to the deck with butyl sealant and screwed the box to the rails from the side. This will make removing the boxes fairly easy if I need to. One of the things I needed to do before installing the dorade boxes, however, was to put up the ceiling in the main cabin so I could then mount the vent cover for the dorades. I used vinyl-backed foam covered panels to create a small 1/4 inch space between the panels and the fiberglass coach roof. This allowed me to run wiring for the thin LED lights for the main cabin. And while we're going in reverse order, before the ceiling panels went up, I glued foam-backed vinyl to the sides around the port lights. And while I was at it, I decided I would try my hand at some carpentry and make maple wood frames for the 6 fixed port lights from scratch. My son came to help me with some assembly and sanding of the frames. You can see his expression of sheer joy at getting to help out. I used countersunk screws to hold the frames in place and plug the holes for a nice finished look. I then varnished the frames and filled the gap between the wooden frame and the aluminum port light with silicone. I'm quite happy with the results. Another thing made from scratch is the new fitting where the Runningback stays attached to the mizzen mast. I designed the part and had it made at a local fabricator. I beefed up the attachment points and lengthened the piece to reduce the stress concentration at the outer edges. I also used 316 stainless steel, which has a slightly higher tensile strength than the original silicone bronze. Speaking of bronze parts, I discovered that the steering quadrant had a very large crack in it. Also, the steering cables had a lot of broken strands and needed replacement. I ordered a new quadrant, but instead of replacing the steel cables with more steel, I decided to go with Dyneema. It's very low stretch and quite a bit stronger than steel. However, it's got much less resistance to chafing than steel, so I had to make sure that all the leads were fair and there were no sharp edges. Here you can see that I ground the inside edges of the cast eye bolts These eye bolts are what attaches the steering cables to the quadrant. I'm kind of nervous about relying on plastic rope for this application, so I'll probably have the emergency tiller close at hand the first few times I take the boat out. For the fuel system, I added a Raycor water separator filter upstream of the 2 filters that I already have. Everything has a bypass, so I can change the filters on the fly. And in a few other things I'm working on, I'm preparing the mast step by cleaning up the corrosion and debris and preparing the blocks to hold the masts in place. I'm also paying the toll to Charon to carry my soul across the river Styx. Well, that's the tradition anyway, and the reason why sailors often place a coin or coins under the mast. After consulting with some other Reliance owners, I decided to go with a dime for the year my father-in-law died. My wife says that she often finds dimes since his passing. The other coin is a 1975 Canadian dollar, recognizing the fact that this boat was built in Montreal in 1975. Let's hope it's a long time before Chiron collects his toll. I'm also replacing some and refinishing the rest of the wood that goes in and around the cockpit. I've got a friend that has stored the wood for the last few years and is now helping me to get everything back on board and looking good. Also, in preparation for the mast stepping later this summer, I took a close look at the spreaders. The spreaders for the mainmast were bent near the base. I couldn't get the right size aluminum tube or end caps to replace them outright, so I ended up cutting off the bent ends and mating the remaining spreader sections to heavier tube. With a larger diameter and twice the wall thickness of the original aluminum, it would take a lot to bend these suckers now. Well, that pretty much covers what I've been up to for the last 6 months. I hope that I'll have the boat moved outdoors to step the mast later this summer, and I'm excited to see how the new chain plates and rigging come together. I'll also have the rudder dropped to put in a new rudder shaft seal and to paint the rudder. Maybe, just maybe, we'll get the bottom wet next spring, and then I'll be able to complete the interior work between a few days of actual sailing. We'll see. Well, thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in a few months for another update. Thanks.